This is a brief video clip from a conference event recorded at the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C., with speakers including America's 75th Attorney General, the Honorable Edwin Meese III, Honorable Becky Norton Dunlop, Natasha Saldorch, Judge Henry Saad, and Joel Anand Sami. For the entire video, please visit Adriatic Institute's YouTube page.
Natasha, Sir Dutch, please come to the podium. Welcome to Heritage.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Becky. Thank you, Becky, for your leadership in organizing this important panel and hopefully completing the unfinished work in much of Eastern Europe and Croatia. Thank you so much. I would like to start my presentation today with Margaret Thatcher's quote from her speech delivered in Zagreb in 1998. I quote, "Capitalism cannot, in fact, operate without a strong administration to police the laws that provide its framework, and it cannot succeed without honesty. Racketeers, black marketeers, and smugglers are not entrepreneurs. They're just plain criminals. Corruption and gangsterism are scourges which afflict many newly developing economies and states. They should be ruthlessly and fearlessly expunged. Otherwise, not just the free market, but freedom itself is in peril." Unquote. The fall of the Berlin Wall gave us hope that the transition to economic and political freedom was near, and the optimism spread among the people. However, the fall of the Berlin Wall was also a sign to communists that their era was ending. The communists quickly regrouped right after the time, actually at the time of the Berlin Wall falling in 1989, and before Croatia declared its independence from Yugoslavia in 1991, Croatia's communists started a grab on land and other property. I would like to take you through a presentation which actually brings us from a perspective of what has been happening in Croatia and the region of Southeast Europe. So it's not just former Yugoslavia, but it's also the countries of Bulgaria and Romania with lack of rule of law, poor protection of property rights, and that already joined the European Union. We see that the Balkan route, which originates in Afghanistan, and goes through the countries via Iran, of Turkey, Bulgaria, Romania, countries of former Yugoslavia, including Croatia, and it's used for trafficking of humans, of arms, of drugs, terrorism financing, and there is a void. There is a coexistence of organized crime and political corruption, and what allows both to flourish is actually lack of independent judiciary and the rule of law. Slavery, human trafficking, is a 32 billion per year industry. There are 200,000 of estimated 1 million women that are trafficked through the Balkans. In a recent, actually this year's U.S. State Department's report on human trafficking, which is called Trafficking in Persons Report 2013, it was astounding to find out that women and girls from the United States, Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and other parts of Eastern Europe are subjected to sex trafficking in Croatia. The same report didn't mention any similar report about U.S. women and girls trafficked in any other countries of Southeast Europe. It was also mentioned that the children are exploited in prostitution on the Adriatic coast, particularly during the peak tourist season. We see that arms trafficking also represents a problem, with Europol stating that the figure of 4 million unregistered illegal war firearms in the Balkans is well known and remains deeply worrying. There are 20 billion per year of heroin trade to the Balkans. Albanian, Pakistani, and Turkish origin criminal groups dominate the trafficking in heroin. That's also from the Europol report. And then we know that 75% of the world's opium is produced in Afghanistan. There were attacks that were not really properly reported in the international media, or it has not bring so much attention like Benghazi situation, for example. There was an attack in autumn 2011 on the U.S. Embassy in Sarajevo, where a police officer was seriously injured. We know of an attack in summer 2012, where 6 Israeli tourists were killed in Bulgaria. This year, a Lebanese-Canadian bank was reported that it used U.S. banking system to launder proceeds and routing the terrorist group Hezbollah. And also, U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency confirmed that Hezbollah traffics cocaine and heroin to fund terrorism, which brings us back to the Balkan route. It is interesting to quote Richard Holbrooke's statement from his book To End the War. He says, Yugoslavia's tragedy was not foreordained. It was the product of bad, even criminal political leaders who encouraged ethnic confrontation for personal, political, and financial gain. Rather than tackle the concrete problems of governance in post-Tito era, they led their people into war. That makes so much more sense from today's perspective. This list shows us illicit financial outflows via crime, corruption, and tax evasion from the countries in the Balkan from 2001 to 2010. These are transactions that are reported actually in the banking system and to the trade reports that countries have with each other. So they do not include any cash transactions, and they are quite underestimated for the real money laundering that is going in the region. So these would be the amounts, as you can see, the highest nominal amount coming out of Serbia of $51.4 billion, compared to also highest relative amount of Montenegro's having 138% of their GDP that left the country between 2001 and 2010. For Croatia, compared to the region, it is 25% of Croatia's gross domestic product. Well, we know the causes. We know the root cause problems. There are many facts that are known and that have not been addressed. And that's actually the purpose also of my presentation, to see how we are going to address the lack of the rule of law and independent judiciary in Croatia, which cannot be dealt from within. This is just a few facts about a bank that became actually from a regional bank, it became international bank, very active in Southeast Europe, and whereby through a bailout that was given by German taxpayers, it was realized that some $3.6 billion were paid just for the losses of the bank in the Balkans. There were some $8 billion unaccounted loans that were given to different individuals in 12 different countries, and that $2 billion were siphoned off to the same bank by Croatia's and Austria's politicians to the accounts during the UN arms embargo. The timeline of Hypo Bank shows that there is a much larger problem, that we have not just Austria's banking institutions to deal with, but also Liechtenstein's institution. Practically, what was happening, there was a concerted effort to have the bank sold to German Bayerische Landesbank, and at the same time, it was just a shell, because the lucrative business of real estate company was divested, and also the accounts of the corrupt politicians and their partners in crime that were deposited actually in Hypo Alpe Adria Bank's branch office in Liechtenstein were taken over by an institution of industry and finance control owned by Prince Michael von Liechtenstein. Here we see how Austria's Hypo Alpe Adria group operated in the region. It is actually, they were receiving cash, and that's the problem of that post-communist, quasi-post-communist, because we never really went into a transition into a market economy. But former communists that grabbed on power continued with very corrupt privatizations. They continued laundering money. They were siphoning money to private accounts via also during UN arms embargo. And all those monies were given back via loans into these different countries. So all these cases have been reported in the media locally, and something has been addressed in Austria, but it has not been resolved in any of the countries of Southeast Europe. This is an interesting book, and it is a book about largest gaming casino company in the world, which actually depicts some of the connections of how the laws are changed to favor the company, and how politicians at the high level, from the highest to the lowest level, are connected, including tax authorities in operations in different countries in Southeast Europe, connected through the gaming industry. A specific case shows us how organized crime works in the region. There was a situation with 100 million euros intercepted. 100 million euros were supposed to be laundered via Montenegro and Hypo Alpe Adria bank accounts in Liechtenstein for a drug lord who actually imported or brought drugs from Latin America via Montenegrin port. It showed that there was no, the operation was such that the investigators from Drug Enforcement Agency, actually US intercepted that, and they really broke the drug ring. They realized that it would not be possible without insider participation from senior management at the Austrian bank. Here we see some reports from BBC on Montenegro, where they realized that the banking industry is really controlled. The main bank, first bank in 2010, controlled by the Prime Minister Djukanovic's family. There was a Bari prosecutor, some from Italy, Giuseppe Scelsi, who actually accused Montenegrin Prime Minister Djukanovic in their court report, I quote, to have promoted, run, set up, and participated in a mafia-type association. They eventually dropped the case because Mr. Djukanovic had diplomatic immunity. We come to the point who is going to address these threats? These threats are significant, and they are affecting the people living on the lands of the Balkans, in the Balkan states. They're affecting Europe, they're affecting the West. We have to remind ourselves that while American soldiers were dying in Afghanistan, the Balkan route was flourishing, bringing proceeds of crime to terrorist group. And we also saw reports that Hezbollah and Al-Qaeda are also financed by the proceeds from drug trafficking, and 75% of heroin is obviously originating in Afghanistan. So we see that when we come to the point who is going to address these issues, just to have a little picture of what is going on with political figures in the region. Member of European Parliament, Strasser, who was Austria's former interior minister. Interior minister in Austria means police minister. And national security, responsible for national security, he accepted offers up to $100,000 in exchange to water down financial regulation laws. There's former Austria's finance minister Grasser, who received 450,000 bribe from Novomatic to reform gambling law in Austria. There is EU Commissioner, current EU Commissioner for Regional Policy from Austria, who is responsible for the EU funds disbursement. This is the second largest budget they have after agriculture at the EU level. Johannes Hahn, he was CEO of Novomatic. And I would like to also remind you that a U.S. State Department did flag Novomatic for casinos in Paraguay, Peru, and South Africa, countries where they operate, were tagged by the U.S. as money laundering conduits for criminal bosses and drug barons. So you have Latin America, you have Montenegro, you have the Balkan route, you have heroin trafficking, you have cocaine trafficking coming from Latin America. It is something, it's mind-boggling, and we need to address these issues. So we look again at the region. We have, for example, Customs Chief of Croatia, HDZ. He was jailed for building party slush funds. He was responsible for policing the borders. And it's interesting to mention that former Romania's Prime Minister, former Croatia's Prime Minister, Slovenia's Prime Minister are jailed, all three jailed for corruption, with the cases coming triggered from abroad. So it wasn't really initiated from within, I would say. And then we have Montenegro's Prime Minister Djukanovic, who is under diplomatic immunity. Austria, the Alpine corruption paradise, there is an article about this, and actually it just affirms what has been said and reported in other sources. The problem is that there is damage to Austrians as well, caused by corrupt practices at some 27 billion euros, or 8% of the country's budget. The Liechtenstein, it's interesting to mention that we have European report, Council of Europe, which says when they talk about the rule of law, what we have in Liechtenstein is that the prince retains in principle the power to block and terminate any investigation of prosecution. So we cannot really expect anything to be initiated from Liechtenstein's side. On the other side, we have to go back to the US. We realized that the drug enforcement agencies, American agency, did broke the cocaine ring in the Balkan region. And it's interesting that also through US Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, United States did penalize Deutsche Telekom with $95 million for bringing foreign officials in Macedonia and Montenegro via Hungary. Then we actually requested we actually requested from Deutsche Telekom to show us the contract because Deutsche Telekom's operation in Croatia has not been addressed. Anyway, Siemens was also bribing officials, including Eastern Europe. They paid $1.6 billion. Daimler Chrysler, they got a settlement for $185 million for bribing officials in Eastern Europe, and Pfizer $45 million. The fact is that all these cases have been initiated by the states, and we have not seen any of the culprits being prosecuted, being found, so practically nothing is going on. It's like nothing happened. Just the case does not exist. And that has to be actually also triggered somehow that we see justice to be served in those countries. We have U.S. Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigation in July 2008. In its report, actually, I quote, said that LGT is a leading Liechtenstein financial institution that is owned by and financially benefits the Liechtenstein royal family. And they are advising U.S. clients to open accounts in the name of Liechtenstein foundations to hide their beneficial ownership of the account assets and establish transfer corporation to disguise asset transfers to and from LGT accounts. And actually, they conclude that LGT, which is owned by royal family, enabled LGT clients to use the bank services to evade U.S. taxes, dodge creditors, and ignore court orders. So U.S. Senate obviously initiated a very important thing to start dealing with money laundering with Liechtenstein, which is very connected to the region. We have, on the other side, when we look at the European Union and what we can expect from European Union, we had our Member of Parliament from UK actually ask an official question. They call it the written question of European Commission, where European Commission has to respond. And his question was about money laundering connected to Hypo Alpe Adria, and the divestment of that real estate arm that I mentioned to you. And practically the European Commission just says that the Commission has no competence to investigate schemes such as those described by the honourable member. This is the responsibility of the relevant national authorities and ultimately of national courts. But if you remember that if national authorities have individuals that are taking bribes, and if those individuals are involved in border policing, in Interior Department, which is a police department, national security, if those individuals are prime ministers, how can we expect from national authorities to resolve any of these cases? There was another question that Roger Helmer, member of European Parliament from UK, asked of European Commission, asking actually specifically about Liechtenstein and about the fact that at the time of the banks being sold to Bayerische Landesbank, which is a German bank, the accounts of corrupt politicians and their private partners in crime were sheltered in Liechtenstein's bank, taken over by Prince Michael von Liechtenstein. How can that happen? German taxpayers were bailing out the bank. Austrian taxpayers were approved by European Commission to be able to bail the bank by additional $8 billion euros, while 8 billion euros are unaccounted for in the whole region of Southeast Europe, and this is not being investigated. So Roger Helmer asked the question again of European Commission, and we got an easy answer. They say, on the question of whether the Commission is aware of the Croatian authorities requesting information from the Liechtenstein authorities, the Commission recalls that this is a matter for the relevant Croatian authorities. The Commission cannot intervene in any such procedures. It's not just laundering money. that belongs to the politicians that were corrupt, that we have crony capitalism, but we have a Balkan route. We have trafficking in humans, organs, arms trafficking, and drug trafficking going through the region. And we have organized crime coexisting with political corruption in the region. And what allows both to flourish is the lack of rule of law, a lack of independent judiciary. We cannot deal with these issues from within. And just a few items, actually a few things about Croatia. Croatia has fraudulent elections, which was actually admitted by the government. There were 1 million illegal votes for a country of 4 million people. That means that half of the parliament could have been voted in based on non-existent votes. Balkan criminals possessing Croatian passports. Practically in 2012, there was a group of criminals, they say belonging to a Balkan organized crime, were arrested in Spain. And they were found to have all Croatian passports. So the investigations led directly to the Ministry of Interior of Croatia, and the track record of sale of these passports since 2006, no high-level officials was held responsible. So we have continued unresolved 15.2 billion and larger amounts of illicit financial outflows. So this amount is just from 2001 to 2010. So there are larger amounts since 1991 via crime, corruption, and tax evasion. And another very interesting, one thing is it's interesting to mention that the court system doesn't really work, and the U.S. State Department reported about 850,000 backlog cases in the court system. And just another thing that the Supreme Court president, there's no distinction between the right and wrong. If a Supreme Court president approves a convicted war criminal to lead the electoral list in the parliament election in December 2012, which was then addressed, but it was too late because it already had an effect. Also, as a result of that, also we have a depressed economy. We have Croatia, for example, has 22% unemployment and 54% unemployment among the youth. And just to show you a few pictures of the victims of corruption in the region. So the lady was attacked. She was a journalist in Montenegro. The gentleman was actually also attacked. He was also in Montenegro. Actually, all three of Montenegro. On the right-hand side, this is a person that was killed in 2004 for reporting about organized crime. And the recent reports actually that were reported by Set Times was that the police actually admitted to having been involved. So official police of Montenegro, their forces that have been involved in actually beating up journalists in Montenegro. And here we have also some victims of corruption. We see in the middle Ivo Pukanic with glasses. He was killed in a car bomb explosion in 2008 in central Zagreb, and he was reporting about organized crime, and he was actually a key witness in a case considering Hypo Adria Bank. The lady was also killed to the right. That's a daughter of a lawyer who was defending a person also connected to Hypo Adria Bank. And these cases were considered unrelated, and practically for the lady, they said that a homeless person killed her. So this has to be opened up and resolved. So what we need actually is that we need principal solutions. We need to establish the rule of law and independent judiciary in Croatia, in the region of Southeast Europe, and it won't happen from within. We see that the European Union doesn't have a muscle at this stage to trigger investigations, to be able to impose foreign assistance in a way. So I believe that we need to look up to also American leadership to see how we can have visiting judges and visiting prosecutors come to Croatia to help honest judges that are in the system, that do not get the cases, that are threatened, that are afraid actually to come out, to be able to establish gradually with new generation of law graduates that will see actually in judicially an honest profession, an honest calling, to be able to gradually establish the rule of law and independent judiciary in Croatia. Thank you so much for your attention.
This is a brief video clip from a conference event recorded at the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C., with speakers including America's 75th Attorney General, the Honorable Edwin Meese III, Honorable Becky Norton Dunlop, Natasha Saldorch, Judge Henry Saad, and Joel Anand Sami. For the entire video, please visit Adriatic Institute's YouTube page.
The same report didn't mention any similar report about U.S. women and girls trafficked in any other countries of Southeast Europe. It was also mentioned that the children are exploited in prostitution on the Adriatic coast, particularly during the peak tourist season. We see that arms trafficking also represents a problem, with Europol stating that the figure of 4 million unregistered illegal war firearms in the Balkans is well known and remains deeply worrying. There are 20 billion per year of heroin trade to the Balkans. Albanian, Pakistani, and Turkish origin criminal groups dominate the trafficking in heroin. That's also from the Europol report. And then we know that 75% of the world's opium is produced in Afghanistan. Drugs, terrorism financing, and there is a void. There is a coexistence of organized crime and political corruption. And what allows both to flourish is actually lack of independent judiciary and the rule of law. Slavery, human trafficking, is a 32 billion per year industry. There are 200,000 of estimated 1 million women that are trafficked through the Balkans. In a recent, actually this year's U.S. State Department's report on human trafficking, which is called Trafficking in Persons Report 2013, it was astounding to find out that women and girls from the United States, Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and other parts of Eastern Europe are subjected to sex trafficking in Croatia, operate without a strong administration to police the laws that provide its framework, and it cannot succeed without honesty. Racketeers, black marketeers, and smugglers are not entrepreneurs. They're just plain criminals. Corruption and gangsterism are scourges which afflict many newly developing economies and states. They should be ruthlessly and fearlessly expunged. Otherwise, not just the free market, but freedom itself is in peril." Unquote. The fall of the Berlin Wall gave us hope that the transition to economic and political freedom was near, and the optimism spread among the people. However, the fall of the Berlin Wall was also a sign to communists that their era was ending. The communists quickly regrouped right after the time, actually at the time of the Berlin Wall falling in 1989, and before Croatia declared its independence from Yugoslavia in 1991, Croatia's communists started a grab on land and other property. I would like to take you through a presentation which actually brings us from a perspective what has been happening in Croatia and the region of Southeast Europe. So it's not just former Yugoslavia, but it's also the countries of Bulgaria and Romania with lack of rule of law, poor protection of property rights, and that already joined the European Union. We see that the Balkan route, which originates in Afghanistan and goes through the countries via Iran of Turkey, Bulgaria, Romania, countries of former Yugoslavia, including Croatia, and it's used for trafficking of humans, of arms, of...
This is a brief video clip from a conference event recorded at the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C., with speakers including America's 75th Attorney General, the Honorable Edwin Meese III, Honorable Becky Norton Dunlop, Natasha Saldorch, Judge Henry Saad, and Joel Anand Sami. For the entire video, please visit Adriatic Institute's YouTube page.
Natasha Saldorch, please come to the podium. Welcome to Heritage.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Becky. Thank you, Becky, for your leadership in organizing this important panel and hopefully completing the unfinished work in much of Eastern Europe and Croatia. Thank you so much. I would like to start my presentation today with Margaret Thatcher's quote from her speech delivered in Zagreb in 1998. I quote, "Capitalism cannot, in fact,